A last kick at 2013 and a look ahead to the new year this morning on For the Record. Good morning, I'm Neil Heinen. It's always dangerous to generalize about an entire year, and heaven knows 2013 had its issues. But from as wide a lens as possible, it wasn't a bad year, relatively speaking. And I hope the next half hour doesn't prove me wrong. But I've invited three colleagues to join in a discussion of last year's highlights and lowlights and maybe give us a bit of a preview of 2014. With me this morning, Madison Magazine editor Brennan Nardi, radio host, commentator, and columnist Darrell Connor, and the editorial page editor of the Wisconsin State Journal, Scott Milfred. Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year.
Just initial impressions, Scott, just when you think about 2013, what comes top of mind for you?
Well, I think about a lot of the attention that Wisconsin's received because of Scott Walker and Paul Ryan and the talk of potential presidential bids there. I think about the dramatic leadership changes that we've had in the region and especially in the city. That's especially true in the education world where
we're going to get
I don't even know if I can tick them all off,
yeah, we'll
but
get
UW, MATC, local school district. The economy has picked up. I think you're starting to see development become more of an issue again because there's more money and there's a little more prosperity, and so developers want to start putting things up. There was one editorial we did where I think there were 6 of those big giant cranes up at one time earlier this year. And then maybe one finally is this sort of Madison having something of an identity crisis where it wants to be this near perfect city that's open, that's diverse, and the largely white power structure of the city is being told by minorities again and again in recent years that it's not working for them and that things need to change. So I think those are some of the things that stick out to me.
Leave it to Milfred. I asked for what pops to mind. He gives the entire editorial agenda for the year. Is there anything left? What did he miss?
No, I mean, he took everything I had. I think what I remember about this year is a new superintendent, of course, and a continued conversation about achievement and making sure that all of our kids succeed. I think the other thing that pops into my head, because I'm in the industry, is the Affordable Care Act. That is probably the biggest undertaking that I've ever seen in my adult life. And I think the jury is still out as to whether or not this is going to work, whether or not it's sustainable. What we do know is that the old way of doing things wasn't sustainable. The question is going to be, I think, not only this first year, but also 3 to 5 years out, how this is all going to shake out. So that was really the biggest things for me.
Yeah, Brennan, what popped for you?
I think I would add, an early challenger, if you will, to Scott Walker and Mary Burke, kind of set the pace a little bit, starting late summer, early fall. I can say that I am her neighbor, and her lights aren't on very much, so she's certainly been busy here over the last few months. But for me in the magazine, we've been really hitting education hard and the achievement gap, economic development, those kinds of things. But Jennifer Cheatham has really just stormed onto the stage here locally, not just in education, but really as that leadership and that transition in that new Madison. And I think she's one of the most highly anticipated, superintendents that we've seen in a long time. It affects so much of our city's culture and life. Our kids are so important to us. So her presence here, her transparency, she's 9 months in and she's been so already working really hard, productive. We've seen school improvement plans for each of the 49 schools that have really identified a key challenge, which is parent and community engagement. And now we have 49 schools working on those issues, and maybe we'll start to see some cream rise to the top in terms of best practices for how we tackle these challenges moving into the future. And she's also acknowledged hard issues like racial bias and the idea that not just disadvantaged kids of color, but all kids of color, their expectations have been lower than white students, and that's a big deal. And then the hiring of more African American teachers. It's just, she says we're on it, and we'll see if that's
She's
true.
been in to meet with our editorial board 4 or 5 times already, and she just does a great job. I'm listening very carefully for potential difficulties there, but her confidence, her knowledge, her intelligence really comes through.
Yeah, you know, the one thing that I've been most impressed by is that she's using words that a lot of her predecessors didn't like to stress, words like accountability or, you know, assessments, we need
Data.
to improve. And some of those words might normally set people off in a city like Madison. They might ruffle some feathers in the community or with the union. But she's done it in a remarkable way where she can talk about things but pull people into it so that they feel like, I want to give you the resources so that we can do this. I want to give you the help that we can do this. And so that's been most interesting to me.
I got to tell you that for me, I can't get out of my head this new image I have of black kids in Madison achieving at a lower rate than anybody else in the country. Black men in Madison and Dane County being imprisoned at a greater rate than any other county in the country. And poverty and unemployment for African Americans worse than any other community in the country. Everything you've all said is true. And yet this is what we were confronted with the Race to Equity report. The statistics are absolutely startling, and somehow we've got to get our hands around the dichotomy there.
Well, I'll say this. I think the statistics are startling. I think for a lot of people. I think for folks of color in this community, we've known it for a long time. When you look at this, what I want people to understand is, and especially in the light of Reverend Alex G's column in the Cap Times, one of the things I heard from a lot of people, and I had Reverend Alex G on the show, was, you know, it was short on solutions. It talked about what the problems were. You know, there's nothing wrong with saying, I don't know. I don't know what the solution is. But what we can do is, first of all, we can confront the truth of what's happening, why it's happening. The other thing we can do is we can put together good, smart people who aren't afraid to tell the truth about what's going on, why it's happening, and then figure out how do we address it. I think that's been the biggest problem. The biggest problem has been our failure to acknowledge the fact that while there is value in personal responsibility, I believe in it. I think everybody on this panel believes in it. The people watching at home believe in it. But that's not the only thing that's going on. And I think people say personal responsibility as a way sometimes of avoiding what some of the other issues could be. So it's really confronting the truth. I think that's what Jennifer Cheatham has done so well, is that she's confronting the brutal truth about what's going on in the school district, and she's put together people around her that aren't afraid to tell the truth, and then figuring out from there how to address it.
Yeah.
And that's what we as a city need to do.
All right, we'll get back to this before the show's over. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about the leadership transition that came up right after this. We're back on this first For the Record of 2014. We'll take a look ahead in just a minute, but right now we're still looking back at 2013. And we've touched on the leadership. It is a sort of historic transition here. We see these every once in a while. Like probably 10 years ago, we might have seen something similar. But Betsy Barhorst stepped down from METC. Kevin Riley left the system. Noble Ray stepped down. Jen Cheatham came on. Becky Blank came on. Jack Daniels came on. Edgewood College President Dan Carey announced he was leaving. It'll be another year for him. The thing that strikes me, Brendan, and I think this was reflected in the M-List issue in November, the leadership change goes deeper than that. And I remember Jen Cheatham talking about regular meetings now with Zach Brandon, the younger head of the Chamber of Commerce, Michael Johnson, Kaleem Kerr, Karen Menendez-Collar, very impressive woman who took over at Centro Hispano this year. Rachel Krinsky, but it's a younger sort of leadership group than I think we've seen around here in a while.
And you know, I've taken it in a little different direction. My beef about Madison has always been that we focus a lot more on people than we do on problems sometimes,
Right.
and sort of these leadership changes and what they mean in the context of the people rather than what's really happening. And what I like about what you're seeing with the next generation, as you put it, with the tech sector or what have you, new entrepreneurs, is that they're showing themselves to be much more collaborative in nature. So that you're seeing this, it's not a kumbaya kind of unproductive managed by committee approach to solving problems, but it's a have a problem, solve a problem. You know, Scott Resnick, the younger city council member and tech entrepreneur, really, you know, bringing all of his professional and, you know, governmental sort of abilities to bear on development in the Capital East District. Joe Parisi, the work that he has done to really just come right on the heels of the racial disparity, race to equity report, and, you know, put money in the budget to tackle the problems right away. I think those are two really good signs of kind of not just the leaders and who they are, but the type of leadership that we're seeing. And then if you go back to people, my goodness, Tim Metcalf of Metcalf's Market, Michael Johnson of the Boys and Girls Club, and Will Green of Mentoring Positives, and what they did, spending 2 nights out on the streets, posing as homeless people. That's new leadership. That's new approaches to solving problems that I can get excited about.
Scott, all right, just two bookends here, but I think that they're worth mentioning. Scott Walker's book, Unintimidated, which said a lot about Scott Walker. The Solidarity Singers, which said a lot about the opposition to Scott Walker. Help us understand the year in politics from that perspective.
Well, I think, you know, the book was an entree to some degree to potentially running for president, or at least building some buzz nationally. I think he's making money on the book, too. Let's not forget that he turned back a lot of his salary when he was the county executive. I don't think he was making maybe $60,000 or $70,000. So I think he's going to make some money on this, and it's going to help his image. And I think he's going to be tough to beat this fall. I think Mary Burke, we still don't know a lot about her. I think she's going to surprise some people, but I think he's really going to be tough to beat. On the Solidarity Singers, I think it started off where they had the sympathy, where Walker was trying to, you know, if you had 3 or 4 people, you had to go get a permit. It just seemed absurd. But I think it played out so long and following those recalls that I think eventually it produced some eye rolling across the state, and I think it kind of hurt the anti-Walker cause over time, and then finally fizzled. Some of them seemed to be upset that it fizzled, that they weren't getting the attention. So I guess that's how I'd see it. Both of those probably in the end turned out okay for Walker.
Are you expecting Kathleen Vinehout to run?
She sure is making noise about it. I have not spoken to her about it, so I don't have any insight on that. She's more grassroots. I'm not so sure she's the ideal progressive candidate for the progressives, though, if they want to go after Mary Burke. I'd be surprised if Mary Burke's not the nominee. I'd be really surprised.
I would, too. But I also kind of have I have this image, and you're much better at predicting elections than I am. I'll tell you,
I don't know,
because I'm terrible. I'm terrible at it. But I just keep thinking, if Tammy Baldwin can win a statewide race for U.S. Senate, Mary Burke can win a race for governor.
No, it's very true. I was surprised, and we got together last year to talk about the election results. I was surprised that Tammy Baldwin won. But when you look at the race that Tommy Thompson ran, I think it made it a little bit easier for her. I think he kind of took things for granted. And Tammy Baldwin did the work of going around the state, especially in areas where people had no idea who she was. You know, because that was the criticism about her was that outside of Dane County or maybe outside of Milwaukee County, no one knew who she was. Yeah. But she worked very hard. Yeah. And you know, if Mary Burke can follow that same blueprint, and at the same time, you know, not fall into the trap of being, well, I'm not Scott Walker. really state some positions, really stand for something, she may have a shot.
Well, what I hear you saying is that Walker's going to run a better campaign than Tommy ran
absolutely.
against him. Do we have a trust issue with the police right now after this year, Brennan, do you think?
I think we absolutely do, and I think it's so unfortunate that Chief Ray, you know, he left. Zach Brandon put it best that I've seen on our Madison Magazine television show, that he unfortunately left on a take and not a make. And I think that with respect to these, you know, the police shootings, the Paul Heinen and the Heinen situations, I just think it's the grief and the concern that the Heinen family and friends have is so, you know, it's so important and so strong. But that, you know, if this had happened on the South Side per se, that particular incident, I don't think we would have seen the kind of galvanization and family and friends feeling empowered enough to come out and do something. So that maybe in some sense it's a, you know, it's a good thing, you know, post, you know, what the horrible thing that happened. Maybe it'll make a difference. But yeah, trust issues for sure.
I mean, I want to just give Noble some credit. I don't know how widely this is known, but he did stay to deal with this issue. I believe that. I believe his wife, when she says Chief Ray stayed, so he could help put this to rest. When we come back, we're going to take a look at 14 right after this. I am back with three of my colleagues: Brennan Nardi, the editor of Madison Magazine; Darrell Connor, radio host on WIBA, commentator, columnist, and the editorial page editor of the Wisconsin State Journal, Scott Milford. Scott, you mentioned development. I want to just spend a little more time on that. The opening of the new library was a big deal and cool, but looking ahead, we've got a lot of really big projects being talked about. The whole Cap East corridor, of course, is sort of underway. But Judge Doyle Square is a big deal, and there's even some talk now about a new jail, and that's going to speak to the future of the city-county building. This could change the, you know, the physical look of the city pretty dramatically.
Yeah, and I also think that one thing behind this, it cannot be overstated, is Epic.
Yeah,
I mean, even though they're in Verona, and that was a big to-do that they weren't in Madison, so many of their workers are here, and this apartment building boom, high-end apartments, because of Epic. The expansions of the airport, it's because of Epic. A lot of
they're now the biggest employer in Dane County. 6,000 plus.
Far the most plane tickets out of, I mean, huge numbers going to Dallas and all over the world. I mean, I think that's driving a lot of this. At the same time, though, you do have leaders in Madison that believe that local government should guide and encourage some big things, some lofty things, and I think that's where that Judge Doyle Square is coming from. That it started out as, well, we need a new parking area here, let's think big, and suddenly you have these dramatic, you know, $100 million plans with a deck up on the city municipal building,
right. A hotel, mixed use,
and a lot of that
destination for people.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that's really exciting. It still will come down to this same old fight, though, of how much is the public willing to encourage that with dollars and TIF. And I personally, though, find it really exciting and am so happy about Epic's influence on that tech sector, particularly, and on just the vibe of young people moving into town.
If Madison wanted to be, you know, the hub for healthcare technology, now is the time to stake your claim in that. I really feel that way. It's the future is bright, if only.
And we're seeing those spin-offs happening.
Absolutely.
I mean, there are new businesses.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, as someone who lives in Verona, and Epic is right in my backyard, Brendan's absolutely right. I mean, this is a huge opportunity for not only Madison, but the entire community to really set ourselves up for the next couple generations.
You got any dreams for this city for 14?
Oh, I have so many. There's just too many. I think the gubernatorial race is going to be interesting since you know Mary Burke is the on the school board. And,
With the eyes of the
play
nation
out.
on us, as it has been for years now.
You know, I do think that not just the economic development bricks and mortar, but the economic development in the tech sector is really super interesting to me, and I think you're going to continue to see the face of Madison changing in terms of development. Capital East District, the the Willie Street. There's a development on Willie Street, 722 Willie Street. That's too big right now, too dense. Parking is an issue, but I really think that whole corridor, coming off of the Capitol, Central Park,
right, the
is going to be
development of the
big coming in 2014. There's just a lot going on, and it kind of feels like a hopeful time right now. And we'll also see what happens with healthcare. A lot of chatter about what's wrong with it, but I think you're going to start hearing stories about people getting those lower premiums and being able to get, having that sense of relief that they do have healthcare.
Hopeful's a good word. Are you feeling it?
I am. I'm hopeful that we can continue the conversation, the conversations that we've been having. As I said at the top of the program,
with a little civility, are you suggesting?
Well, with a little civility, but sometimes it can get heated, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think people are so afraid to offend one another that we tend to sidestep issues. We talked about leadership. And I think for me, I think more important than looking for this transformational leader, this leader that can rise above everything and everyone can follow, I think all of us have a responsibility to contribute to this community in terms of trying to wrap our arms around the issues that we have. So I'm really hopeful that we can continue to have a real upfront, honest conversation about some of the things in our city that need fixing.
Yep. Scott, you've made clear what you think is coming up in 2014 and your New Year's Day headlines.
If only I was right about it.
And they were pretty clever. Yeah. But in terms of maybe a little more sober look at 2014, what do you see coming up?
One possibility that I've heard bandied about that I think is kind of exciting. You talked about the generational change, and you talked about Scott Resnick, and Mayor Paul Sagan has said he's running again for mayor, although in a certain way he has to say that so that he's not a lame duck. I mean, if he were to change his mind and not run, I mean, imagine somebody like a Scott Resnick. I could see him running. He's about the age that Sagan was when he first ran, as sort of something of a kid. I mean, I think that generational torch is being passed, and I find that exciting, and I'm hopeful for 2014. And I think the governor's race is going to be an interesting race. One thing we've learned in national politics is that debates seem to be having more impact maybe than they had in the past, and I'm hoping that's going to be the case. One of our headlines is that we're hoping Walker and Burke will agree to a lot of debates.
Yes.
We'll see.
Yes, we all do. Thanks very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll do this again in 6 months and see how right or wrong we were. We're going to come back and wrap up For the Record right after this. My thanks to Brennan, Darrell, and Scott for being here today. Have a great weekend, a great 2014, and we'll see you back here next Sunday morning at 10.